What's the outlook for the markets with growing tensions in the Middle East? Well, it's time to get to our market outlook with our partners Forsyth, Barr, and Zoe Wallis is an investment strategist there. She's with us this morning. Zoe, good morning.
Good morning, Ryan.
Let's start with the oil futures market opening at 10 o'clock this morning in a couple of hours. What are we expecting to see there?
Yeah, look, I think following the weekend's events, I think there's undoubtedly going to be a lift in oil prices and expectations around where things go from here. Obviously, how this plays out is really dependent on what Iran decides to do in terms of response and reaction to the events over the weekend. The worst case scenario for all markets is if they do choose to interfere and somehow close the Strait of Hormuz. About 20% of the world's oil supplies go through that strait, so that would have a meaningful impact on what happens with oil prices.
And our markets, I mean, generally, you'd have to say the markets have been pretty resilient to international shocks on the whole, not just the Middle East, but, you know, trade tensions, a whole bunch of stuff. Do you expect that we will see that resilience when the New Zealand market's the first to open since the US got involved in the war in the Middle East, that resilience continue? And then, of course, as the international markets open up through the day and tonight?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Ryan. It's been quite surprising how subdued some of the responses have been to these big events and these big shocks, you know, particularly tariffs and all the other geopolitical tensions we've seen over the last 6 months. Look, I think there probably will be a risk-off reaction, and we're certainly seeing that in initial signals around currency moves over the last, since the weekend. What will depend, as I say, is where this goes, but I would say there's going to be an initial knee-jerk reaction in terms of risk-off, and that is something to be wary of, I think, as an investor. Don't initially buy into that sort of bad news headlines and some of those knee-jerk reactions and shocks, because often those fade away over the coming sort of weeks and days. So worth watching that one.
Brilliant. Zoe, thank you very much for that update. Lovely to have you on the program on a Monday morning as always. That's our market update thanks to Forsyth Barr.